الله وبركاته.
Mute her, Noura. No, I'm just kidding. Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How
No,
are
I'm
How are
coming.
you
I'm
doing?
coming to Minnesota next weekend, inshallah.
No
Oh,
way.
wow.
Yeah,
Inshallah.
I'm going on a road trip, a 22-hour road trip with my kids,
Oh, wow.
inshallah. We're
Yeah.
crazy,
All
alhamdulillah.
right, so we are recording, Noura. We are on YouTube. So, Assalamu alaikum. So, Noura, you want to stay safe. You don't want to tell us where you're going, and make sure you don't tell us which highway that is. So, stay safe.
No, to the moon, to the moon.
Oh, yeah, there you go. All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. And today, inshallah, yes, let's kind of review what we did last time. I'd like to look at the Arabic side so we can see it. Let me see. We did Qiyam al-Layl, the rulings on Qiyam al-Layl. We also did Sujood al-Tilawa, right? We went in details with that. We also did Salat al-Duha. We went in Salat al-Duha. We talked about some details in Salat al-Duha. And uh, we went in details in pretty much in each and every single one. So that was, alhamdulillah, a good revision of all the different things that we may know and we may not know, but it's just a good review. We kind of went in some details of some of the things, whether it's in regards to the uh, Salat or was it Sajdat al-Tilawa? Is that considered something that we have to have wudu for? Do we have to face the qibla? How do we relate with the different rulings that say that we have to have hijab for or sajdat al-tilawa and so forth? And we talked about those differences of opinions, right? So now we are actually on this chapter, which is the chapter that talks about the times when prayer is forbidden in. Wait a minute, there are times that you cannot pray in, not even make a dua. No, we're talking about the actual prayer, and we're talking about the prayer that you would do ruku' and sujood for. We're not talking about a prayer that you're probably making an invocation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or perhaps maybe reading Quran or doing dhikr. Okay, that's not the prayer that we're talking about. We're talking about a specific prayer, which is basically that prayer that consists of ruku and sujood. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. And we did mention that there are the obligatory prayers and then there are salat al-tatawwu or the voluntary prayers. And we said that the voluntary prayers are basically the ones that you do not pray during the times that are forbidden in, that it's forbidden to pray during those times. So let's look at those times. There are 5 different times that you cannot perform prayers during those times. And therefore, just keeping in mind those times. Let's see. The first one is طلوع الفجر الثاني. Okay, إلى طلوع الشمس. So what does that mean when it starts talking about starting from the second half of the factual time? What do you mean factual time? Okay, let me explain that. So there's a time when you would wake up like around, I would say 3 a.m., give or take 3 a.m. right at that time. Okay, then you would see kind of like a sudden brightness in the horizon, and as if it's going to become, the second day and the sunrise is there. But that's not what we're talking about. You can pray tahajjud, you can pray qiyam al-layl at that time, but we're talking about the second factual. So when it says factual, we're talking about the official. Okay. When I would have actually said official, not factual, but this is what they wrote. The official time for Fajr, which is when you would start seeing kind of like a line in the horizon, and this line would mark basically the start and the sunrise, and then you've got the sun already being well, sorry, the horizon on the on in general is like that line. It's dark, and then you've got this line that's starting to bring us the sign that there's going to be a sunrise. Let me see if I can actually find something that can give us right there. Maybe Al-Fajr as-Sadiq. I'm going to see if Al-Fajr al-Sadiq. Let's see that one. Maybe there's an image that can make it clearer. There you go. There you go. There you go. This is it. Love it. They already made it easy for us. Okay, here we go. So al-Fajr al-Kadhib, you would say the sudden brightness in the horizon. Okay, that's al-Fajr al-Kadhib. It's not the official Fajr, not the official dawn. Dawn. Al-Fajr al-Sadiq, you would see in the horizon right there this line that marks the darkness of night and the daylight starting to show its signs. You see it? So this is the factual second time of dawn, and this is the non-factual, meaning let's call it the non-official. Okay, now you see it? I like that. I don't know why I'd never thought about actually, having you to see it. Let's see another time. See another picture. There you go. Here's another picture. Good job. Yeah, got another picture. Let's see if we can get another picture. I guess this is it. Okay, now you see it. All right, so let's now go back to it. So when you look at this time, you can still pray tahajjud. That's not the actual fajr, okay? But once you get to this timing, then in that situation, it would not be permissible to pray any prayer but Salat al-Fajr. Only Salat al-Fajr and the Sunnah Ratiba, which is the 2 rak'ahs that you would pray for Fajr. Once you get to this timing, that's the only thing that you could pray. Sunnat al-Fajr and Salat al-Fajr. Okay, let's see. So, what's the evidence on that? The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا طَلَعَ الْفَجْرُ فَلَا صَلَاةَ إِلَّا رَكْعَتَيِ الْفَجْرِ. When the dawn breaks, no prayer is to be performed except the 2 rak'ahs of Fajr prayer, which is the voluntary prayer, and also the Fajr, that is the Fajr prayer, and also the 2 rak'ahs of Sunnah that basically come along with the Fajr prayer. Let's see. So if a person basically is at that time, then that one it's really clear. What if you came in for the masjid and it was at that time? Do I pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid? We're going to talk about that, but generally, yes, we're going to talk about that. Number 2, من طلوع الشمس حتى ترتفع قدر رمح في رأي العين. Now, this is the second time that you cannot pray in. It basically starts from the time of sunrise until the sun reaches the height of a spear in one sight. So we're looking at the sunrise, and then we're talking about approximately half an hour after the sun rises. You cannot pray during that time. Let's see if we can actually find the a picture that basically gives us all of that. Let's see. I'm going to put al-awqat al-manhi as-salatu fiha. Let's see if we can have that. It doesn't actually give me any pictures for that. Oh, actually there is. Look at it. Here we go. There you go. Here it is. So basically said this one, this time. This is the time that we're talking about. So we're looking at sunrise. We could start seeing the sun is starting to come out. So you're going to wait until the actual sun, the actual sphere, you're seeing it basically go up beyond that, well, beyond basically the earth by almost a spear, which basically would take almost a half an hour to basically have that. So here it said by 15 minutes, half an hour, within that time, lapse. And then when the sun is in the middle of the sky, how do I know that the sun is in the middle of the sky? You would basically not see the shadow for the different things that are around you. Number 4, let's see, number 4 is basically when the sun, let's see, the asr, hold on, we were supposed to do the hadith for the third one. Let's see, for the third one. when the sun is in the middle of the sky. Let's see, right there, the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of Uqma ibn Amir, ثلاث ساعات كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ينهانا أن نصلي فيهن أو أن نقبر فيهن موتانا حين تطلع الشمس بازغة حتى ترتفع وحين يقوم قائم الظهيرة حتى تميل الشمس وحين تتضيف الشمس للغروب حتى تغرب. There are three times that Allah's Messenger forbade us to perform prayer or bury our dead, and they are when the sun begins to rise until it's fully up, when the sun is at a height at midday until it passes over the meridian, and when the sun draws near to setting until it sets. So this hadith would basically tell us the three times that we had already talked about. Okay, so whether it's burial or whether it's prayer, that particular time you could not actually do those actions in it, whether it's prayer or burial. When the sun is rising, when the sun is in the middle of the sky, basically you're waiting until it passes over the meridian, and that you could say basically by seeing whether there are shadows in order to know whether it's duha time or whether it's duha time. And حين تتضيف الشمس الغروب, in other words, it's basically this time when the sun is about to set and you could see that the sun is starting to go down. It usually would have a yellow ray. In other words, those yellow rays are basically filling out the skies right there. That's how we would know. That's how we would know that whether this is a hated time or whether it's permissible to pray. But let's say there's actually more. Let's look at the other ones. Number 4, after Salat al-Asr, من صلاة العصر إلى غروب الشمس. So after Salat al-Asr until sunset. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا صلاة بعد الفجر حتى تطلع الشمس ولا صلاة بعد العصر حتى تغيب الشمس. The Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in the hadith, no prayer should be performed after Fajr until the sun rises, and no prayer should be performed after Asr until the sun sets. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about not only the timing, but we're also talking about no prayer after Asr prayer. No prayer after Asr prayer. So we're talking about the first timing, which basically is after Fajr. So there's no prayer after Fajr until sunrise. And then there's no prayer after Asr until sunset. Okay, let's see number 5. If the sun is setting to basically start to sunset, so basically that. Okay, this timing right there. Okay, that's when it's also hated. Unless, let's say, look at number 5. He said, starts from the time when the sun starts setting until it sets. So this is number 5. And then the person, the Muslim cannot pray in it unless the person is basically making up missed prayers. So what does it mean, making up missed prayers? We're talking about prayers that you probably had missed and you want to make up. Maybe you overslept Asr and you just woke up and you had seen that the sun is setting, or you were sleeping and you had seen that the sun is rising. For example, should you actually pray at those hated times or not? Just a note, there are differences of opinions between scholars. The preponderant is that you can pray during those times only if you were basically making up a missed prayer. So what's the evidence? من نام عن صلاة أو نسيها فليصليها إذا ذكرها. You could see this hadith is basically agreed upon between Bukhari and Muslim, and the hadith quotes in English, if anyone misses a prayer out of oversleeping or forgetfulness, he must perform it once he remembers. So when you look at once he remembers, when we're speaking about remembering, whether we're speaking about remembering something or whether we're speaking about probably waking up or probably being at that time, let's say somebody is coerced not to pray, but you pray it as soon as you're capable of praying it. Okay, let's see. What about things like if we were to do certain things? What are the only things that even do prayers, at least we're talking about, that even if it was during that time that we could still do? Number one is that to do the 2 rak'ahs for tawaf. Tawaf is what again? Tawaf is going into circling around the Kaaba. Remember, we do that 7 times. The only one that is a resident of Mecca is the only one that when they would come into the Kaaba, they don't do tawaf every single time. They could just do 2 rak'ahs for Tahiyat al-Masjid. But for you, every time you go there, you basically have to do that tawaf. And after tawaf, after you do your tawaf, you basically stand at the maqam and do your 2 rak'ahs after the tawaf in maqam Ibrahim. Okay, let's see. What's the evidence on that? The Prophet ﷺ said, لا تمنعوا أحدا طاف بهذا البيت وصلى أية ساعة شاء من ليل أو نهار. The Prophet ﷺ had said, do not prevent anyone from circumambulating this house that is the Kaaba and from performing prayer any moment he desires by day or night. So that tells us that even during the times that it is cited to pray in, that would still be considered as permissible if it is in the Kaaba. If it is in the Kaaba. Okay, and certainly it-tawaf or circumambulating around and going around the Kaaba is basically permissible throughout the day and throughout the night. So the same thing, if going around the Kaaba is permissible, then the 2 rak'ahs that come after it are also included in the ruling for it. Now, here's the question. In regards to this hadith, من نام عن صلاة أو نسيها فليصليها إذا ذكرها. Whoever oversleeps a salah or forgets it, then they would pray it as soon as they remember it. Another thing is that there are certain prayers that there are perhaps certain necessities that require a prayer and perhaps we cannot delay it, such as صلاة الجنازة. But you already mentioned earlier that we shouldn't be burying during the time of sunset. That's true. But let's just assume something happened. Okay, something happened, I don't know, some rush hour, it delayed the funeral to be present and actually get buried. I don't know, the delay happened, not something that was intentional, it just happened. Okay, then in that situation, just as we cannot bury this deceased unless we would pray Salat al-Janazah, so now we're stuck. We either delay this janazah slash the deceased from burial until the second day, which is going to be one, probably making the body decay even more, possibly even making it a big hassle. So in that situation, our best option is to bury it even during the time of makruh. Okay, that was probably the best option at that time. So in that situation, it would be permissible to bury that janazah during that time, but of course it has to be preceded by Salat al-Janazah first. So Salat al-Janazah during the time of hated times, it can be permissible to pray in. Yet there are differences of opinions between scholars on that. Just a note. And that's not only for Salat al-Janazah that there are differences of opinions, but other prayers like Tahiyyat al-Masjid. Tahiyyat al-Masjid is what? Is basically the 2 rak'ahs that when you come inside the masjid, when you just come inside the masjid, is it every time like I come in the masjid? Yes, every time you come in the masjid, the first thing that you would do when you enter the masjid is pray 2 rak'ahs, unless They're already performing the obligatory prayer and Salat al-Jama'ah is already happening. Then in that situation, you would join the congregation, you would join Salat al-Jama'ah, and you would skip Tahiyyat al-Masjid. But if you had enough time to pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid, or you came in while the sun was probably in this situation, or that situation, or you had already prayed Asr, or you had already prayed Fajr, because that's basically making 5 times. Remember, those are the times that you would basically see, but then there are the 2 extra ones are after Fajr prayer and after Asr prayer. That would basically make the 5 times. Okay. But if you had come inside the masjid, okay, and you wanted to pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid, you didn't, because you just came into the masjid. Okay, there are differences of opinions between scholars whether you can pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid during these 3 + 2 in your mind, the Fajr, after Fajr, and after Asr prayer, whether you can pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid or not. Okay, or even Salat al-Kusuf. Salat al-Kusuf is the eclipse prayer. Okay, the first opinion basically regarded that it's absolutely haram to pray these voluntary prayers, regardless of that reason being there or not, and that it basically means that we should not be praying any non-obligatory prayers or makeup prayers, or that these times are basically the hated times. And that's why even that opinion regarded that if you were to wake up and let's say you missed Fajr and the sun was rising, according to that opinion, you can't even pray your Fajr until the sun finally rises. So you're going to be waiting 15 minutes to half an hour until the sun fully rises so that you would make up your prayer. The second opinion said, well, no, this is actually talking about the prayers that are voluntary that don't necessarily have a reason. So that's the Shafi'i madhab. The Shafi'i madhab considered that prayers like Tahiyyat al-Masjid, or probably the prayer like the Tahiyyat al-Masjid probably during Salat al-Jumu'ah, or probably Salat al-Kusuf, or probably Salat al-Janaza as an example. Those are prayers that you can pray during the hated times because they have a reason to it. And this reason is basically telling us that this isn't just any voluntary prayer, but there's a reason for it. And they consider that that is that prayer, or at least the reason that would make a specific, let's say, evidence to making it exclusive. Okay, so any questions about that? This is the end for the timing that you cannot pray in. Can we make up the sunnah for Fajr after Fajr? Yes, you can. You can make up Fajr, Sunnah Fajr. So you messed up. You didn't have enough time to pray Sunnat al-Fajr. Okay, you didn't have enough time to pray Sunnat al-Fajr. So you basically wanted to prioritize Salat al-Fajr, because if you are to pray Sunnat al-Fajr, you might actually end up missing out the desired or the obligatory time for Fajr. So you decided to pray Fajr and then pray Sunnat al-Fajr. Okay, so can you make up Sunnat al-Fajr during that hated time? Differences of opinions between scholars, but the best and the preponderant opinion is make up Sunnat al-Fajr after the sun rises and not during the hated time. Layla Ali, go ahead, dear.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
When you go to the haram, do you pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid? Like, how does that work?
No, you don't pray. For you and I, no, because we're not residents of Mecca. So you don't pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid, you do tawaf.
And that's okay. That's all. It applies to all the masajid, like anytime you
You do
travel.
tawaf and then you do Tahiyyat al-Masjid. No, you don't do tawaf around any masjid except
No, I'm saying like Tahit al-Masjid, you only prayed at your own masjid? Your local masjid?
Any masjid that you go into.
Oh, but the Kaaba were visitors. That's what you mean?
The Kaaba has a different story, dear. So
Oh, okay.
the Kaaba, its Tahit al-Masjid is actually doing tawaf and then doing 2 rak'ahs. Unless you're a resident there, then you would just do 2 rak'ahs and not tawaf. Okay. But any other masjid, the first thing that you do when you come inside the masjid is that you would pray Tahit al-Masjid. Any masjid, the first thing you do is basically pray Tahit al-Masjid. Did I answer that one, dear?
Yes, Jazakallah khair.
Okay, وإياكم. Let's now go for if there are any questions on that the other part that we talked about. Go ahead. Okay, now we're going to talk about, you could see that I didn't really do a lot of, let's say, highlighting because I'm going to skip a lot on this, all right, but we're still going to talk about it. And this is talking about Salat al-Jama'ah. Salat al-Jama'ah, which is the prayer and congregation, and specifically at the masjid. So this is talking about Salat al-Jama'ah in the masjid, and not necessarily just any jama'ah where we're together, but no. This is talking about praying Salat al-Jama'ah inside the masjid. And just a note, there are differences of opinions between scholars on whether Salat al-Jama'ah, if we're talking about the 5 daily prayers for men, whether it is obligatory for every salah or whether it's a sunnah. Really? There's some scholars that said it was obligatory for every salah for men. Yes, the Hanbali madhab regarded that every prayer for the men, if they are nearby a masjid, and we're not talking about real long distances here, but if they're nearby a masjid, that it should be in the masjid. And it should be in congregation in the masjid and not skipping the congregation. Okay, like what? What are we talking about? Like the 5 daily prayers, for example. Okay, so you want to keep in mind, of course, this is talking about men, not women. For women, it's a sunnah for them to attend the congregation, but not obligatory. Will she get rewarded for attending the congregation? Certainly she will. Does she have to attend the congregation? No, she doesn't have to. And there are no differences of opinions between scholars that a woman is not obligated to attend the masjid and attend whether we're speaking about Salat al-Jumu'ah or whether we're speaking about the congregational prayers in general for the 5 daily prayers. No differences of opinions that it's a sunnah for a woman. Yet, the Hanafi madhab kind of had its own stance for women's prayer, and for the Hanafi madhab, they kind of had, let's say, a strict stance on the women's attendance in the masjid, and especially for the younger women. So younger means what? Younger means 40 and less. So that puts me on the older end, I guess. Okay. 40 and less or 30 and less, that would basically mark as a shawab. What do they mean by shawab? Shawab means the younger one. So for the Hanafi, they regarded that ash-shawab, the younger women, should not be attending the masajid and should not have a place even in the masjid. And they depended on a hadith when Sayyida Aisha had said, if the Prophet ﷺ would have known what women had caused in the masajid in terms of fitna, he would have prevented them from attending. Okay. Now, but of course, is that Sayyida Aisha's opinion is that basically probably her recommending that women would take the different regulations of attending the masjid more seriously. Whatever the inference is, we basically see that the Hanafi madhab regarded that younger women should not attend the masjid. And based on this fatwa, all the areas that pretty much are predominantly Hanafi madhab don't even have a place, not even a corner for women praying in their masajid. So you can go to India, no place for women. You can go to Pakistan, no place for women. But you go to Turkey, the situation is different. Were they influenced by perhaps maybe a Shafi'i madhab, who knows? You go to same thing, you go to Bosnia, even though very strict Hanafi, but they do have a place for women. But anyhow, so just to let us know, when we're speaking about the place for prayer, the majority of the scholars, in terms of women, they considered that it is permissible for women to join in the congregation, and in fact, it's a sunnah that she would be rewarded for. Okay, let's say, so in general, we do see that joining in or gathering in different types of prayers, different types of, let's say, good deeds, is basically something that Islam had encouraged. But I'm an introvert. Certainly, that's Islam's therapy to help you relate to those that are right now making up as part of the ummah and making up basically the ummah unity in order to put the ummah in. So we could see the training for this is number one, you had once a week, just as Salat al-Jumu'ah is to train the Muslims in making these gatherings once a week, and you basically had a number of different prayers throughout the day. Basically, the 5 daily prayers throughout the day to be prayed at the masjid, and you also have this unity that would be happening twice a year, which is Salat al-Eid, twice a year, Salat al-Eid, Eid al-Fitr, and basically Eid al-Adha. Okay, so that would be joining and gathering twice. So training, a daily training, a yearly or an annual training, or a monthly training. Basically, we would see that as well, and we would see a weekly training for Salat al-Jumu'ah. So what is that for? Why are we gathering with the rest of the Muslims? It's basically to remind us that there are certain prayers, certain inspirations that could only happen when people are gathered. And this is extremely important. Even if you're an introverted person, certain gatherings or certain spiritual inspirations would only happen when other people are present. Just keep that one in mind. When other people are present, certain inspirations have an spiritual effect on the person. And that's why it's important to attend those times. You might say, I'll just pray it at home, but you're missing out on an inspiration from the Muslims. But every time I go there, I would say the Muslim ignorance, I would say Muslim basically shoving and pushing and all of that, and the way they would just mess up the bathrooms, etc. You have to keep in mind that this Muslim ummah is your family. That if you don't like something about your family, you don't just decide to run away from your family, but you work on fixing it. You work on making this family basically be at its best. You don't run away from your family because you just don't like their attitude. That's the same thing. If you don't like the way the masjid smells, well, can you probably think of maybe collecting donations to change the carpet? Perhaps, or maybe if the walls are too moldy, then we can probably, hey, join together to collect donations to probably remove the walls and replace them with newer walls or whatever. It's basically to remind us that the ummah is your family. You cannot just run away from the ummah because you don't like an attitude, or run away from a masjid because you probably dislike certain things that happen in the masjid. You have to basically invest in changing the ummah, in changing the situation. We cannot run away from it. So this unity is in order to enhance our spiritual relations. This unity is to enhance how we would also be judgmental, but in a positive way. So it's basically certainly to be judgmental in a positive way, in a way that is basically enhancing one another to make us better Muslims. Okay. And certainly, that is also to bring about support, spiritual support, emotional support, and certainly make us a family where hearts are together. Of course, when you see somebody every single day, this person just becomes part of you. And certainly, they would know one another, whether it's visiting someone being sick or probably for a person dying, that they would give them the condolences, or whether it's helping those that are probably in need, or even sometimes letting others recognize the Muslim presence and how this is also a social bond. This is also political power. This is also letting those that are not even Muslims see the Muslim power, and the Muslim power basically is seen by those types of gatherings. Those types of gatherings speak a lot. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ had said, لا تختلفوا فتختلف قلوبكم. Do not defer while standing, whether in prayer, straighten your rows, or whether we're speaking about deferring, العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب, or whether we're speaking about deferring at times when we're probably just divided. So we're not supposed to be getting divided, but we're supposed to be creating creating those bonds as much as we can in order to bring about that support. Oh, okay. Let's see. So other times, well, basically another reason for doing that those congregations, or at least those times when we're united, is basically also to teach the person that might not know their Islam. In other words, an opportunity to do ordering for what is good and forbidding what is evil. I know the younger generation is not going to be able to handle that, because at the time, whether it's the American culture right now or whether it's the Western culture, it's all about considering relativism. So you should not be, according to that relative idea, you shouldn't be giving any form of judgment, and you shouldn't be judging anybody. So they'll basically stand and consider that you're just being judgmental, you're being offensive, but that basically comes from a postmodern culture, and certainly that's not what Islam says. No, Islam regards that ordering for what is good, forbidding what is evil, and teaching the people that probably are doing the wrong thing, and probably giving them directions, probably giving them a nice way, a nice gesture to inform them about the rulings of Islam. That's basically one thing that can teach the other Muslims by example. By example. And that's basically creating another type of a spiritual bond, educational bond, and certainly a bond that can bring about a culture together. Just like,
That's really nice. I love that, mashallah.
yeah, subhanallah, Nura, you could see there are those times that when we were feeling secluded, we were feeling left out, etc. And subhanallah, Salat al-Eid just comes in, or Salat al-Eid or Salat al-Jumu'ah, just comes in to create a bond. Just bringing in another family, especially for those. I mean, I guess that this is the most time maybe I felt with the reverts, to be honest, being alone in the place that I'm living in. I think that's the most time that I felt with the reverts. I was really feeling alone. But in Minnesota, I mean, everybody knows, Nura knows, I have a very, very big family, to the point that we're probably going to be later be considering Minnesota as our capital. Right, Noura? A very
Subhanallah.
huge.
Yeah, so you know what it's like, subhanallah.
I know what it's like, now I know what it's like when they would say during Eid, you just feel left out. But it's actually not only me. There's so many people here that don't actually have family, and you could see they'd be just sitting down in the corner. It's like everybody is happy. At least Malaysians are here are happy, but then you're seeing, well, no one's here to tell me Eid Mubarak, no one's here to embrace me. So we come in as basically the immigrant with no family. All right. من غير شر. But alhamdulillah, at least, you would
I mean,
know.
the bond of iman sometimes is
There you
stronger
go.
than family, subhanallah.
That's the most important thing. Create a family. Okay. Remember Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, when Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, when he was calling out on his son to go onto the ark, and then his son refuses. Prophet Nuh alayhi salam was saddened by the fact that his son refused to go onto the ark, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him that uh, that his attempt to somehow intercede for his son, he said, إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ إِنَّهُ عَمْرٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. He's not part of your family, for the action that he had done is not a pious action. That's to remind us that, your bond is really based on piety. That's the most important thing. Your bond is based on piety. So as long as you are there, you're creating this bond, don't be too saddened. But at the same time, please do feel with those that may not have family, whether they're probably new immigrants to a new country, or whether we're talking about new reverts, not having family, etc. Please feel with these people to give them that spiritual support, that bond. And certainly, I would like to salute especially the African Americans, by the way. Sorry, I would like to salute them because even though, and I had seen the African Americans especially, by the way, despite the fact that they would probably be the only Muslim in their family, but I must admit, I absolutely love the inspiration that African Americans would give when uh, they know no weakness. They're very strong, and even when they probably may be isolated, maybe they definitely feel a lot of discrimination from the Muslim community, by the way. There's a lot of discrimination in the Muslim community, the way that the African Americans are treated, but they don't they pretend they don't say it. They become really numb. They know how to go beyond it and create a bond, and then they would become the most loved. They would become the most loved. They know no obstacle, but they would have the most beautiful spirit, the most beautiful soul, and they would always be the ones to remind us. And subhanallah, I can, remind us that no, that's not what Islam says. And they'll basically remind us how to stick to our principle of Islam to basically connect with the rest of the Muslims and make and create this bond. All right. So that doesn't mean that other communities are not like that, but this is one community that I must, I guess, endorse, because especially in the early 90s, late 80s, we had a lot of African American Muslims that despite all the discrimination that they were facing, whether from the Muslims or whether discrimination from the general white population, of course, in all the discrimination that they were facing, but they didn't let them that weaken them. So that is something that is good to learn from. It's good to learn from, and just keep that one in mind. Okay, that even if the new community, that is the Muslim community right there, may not be as embracing, may not be as supposed to be living up to their Islam, you live up to the Islam, you live up to that principle, and keep in mind that all the Muslims are also trying to grow and trying to become better in their Islam as well. Just like you're making your baby steps, some people are making their baby steps even though they were born Muslim. They are still making their baby steps, and many Muslims some are struggling, crawling, some are probably running faster than others, but just keep that one in mind. So don't be fast in judging, the whole Muslim community and say, that's it, I'm leaving. Even if you may not feel that embracement, you yourself be that role model. I know it's hard to be the role model when you yourself are looking for the role model, but trust me, all the Muslims are looking for the right role model. All the Muslims are looking for the role model. Okay, let's go back to our topic. In the hadith, that was actually narrated by Bukhari and Muslim. So when you see muttafaqun alayh, that means that this hadith is narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, and that the Prophet ﷺ had said, the prayer in congregation is 27 times superior to the prayer performed individually. In other words, by a person alone, you basically get 27 times the credit. That's a good deal. That's a very good deal. In another narration, 25 times. Are we ladies included in this? You sure are. You are included in this as well. So, but you gotta keep you gotta keep in mind, you gotta take those regulations in attending the masjid seriously as well. Okay, so in general, whether we're speaking about men, no, certainly whether they were on a journey, or whether they were resident, or whether they were in fear, or probably just in residence, and the situation was secure and all of that, considering the prayer in the masjid and basically doing it in the masjid is definitely superior. Why? Because then you're enhancing the power of the masajid. You're then basically enhancing the ummah gathering and the unity, and you're definitely going to be enhancing your credit with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it said hayya ala salah, hayya ala al-falah, that this is come to prayer, come to success. So then in that situation, you're increasing your chances of success. Okay, let's see. When we look at having that salah, especially during times when there's probably war, there's probably, some fear. Remember COVID and all of that. Should we actually pray in the masajid despite, COVID was, I guess, I guess they really later admit that they over-exaggerated it, but whatever. Okay, let's see. So the ayah says, وَإِذَا كُنْتَ فِيهِمْ فَأَقَمْتَ لَهُمُ الصَّلَاةِ. And if you were with them and you had basically delivered, or you led them in prayer and let a group of them stand in prayer. Now, why is it talking about this now? So this particular prayer in this ayah was actually in the context of praying in congregation, but not any time of fear. But this is actually talking about in a time when the armies are basically busy fighting. In other words, we're talking about in the midst of when people, and certainly the army, is basically under attack. Their life is right now at risk. But the ayah was basically teaching them that there are certain prayers to be done in congregation even when your life is at risk. And that's basically that ayah in Surah An-Nisa, where it tells us how to pray that prayer. We're not going to go in details with that right now. Done it before in Tafsir Surah An-Nisa, so we're not going to go in details right now with that one. We'll talk about that some other time. But that was just trying to point out that if Salat al-Khawf was in the midst of when people's lives were basically on the target, that there would be a congregation to pray for that salah, basically in congregation, that we shouldn't be missing out on salat al-jama'ah. How would it be with other times as well? Let's see. There is another evidence of the importance of salat al-jama'ah. The Prophet ﷺ said, إن أثقل الصلاة على المنافقين صلاة العشاء وصلاة الفجر ولو يعلمون ما فيهما لأتوهما ولو حبوا ولقد هممت أن آمر بالصلاة فتقام ثم آمر رجلا فيصلي بالناس ثم أنطلق معي برجال معهم حزم من حطب إلى قوم لا يشهدون الصلاة فأحرق عليهم بيوتهم بالنار. Okay, let's see. The Prophet ﷺ had said in the hadith, the most difficult prayer for the hypocrites is the Fajr prayer and the Isha prayer. Why are they the most difficult? They're the most difficult because their body, of course, is definitely tired, but then it's also the time to rest. So they basically would be really, lazy to pray Fajr and Isha prayer. So the Prophet ﷺ said, if they knew the reward for those prayers, that is to pray them in the masjid, he said they would certainly present themselves in the masajid even if they had to crawl to it. And then he added, certainly I was about to order the prayer, that is basically the mu'addin, to pronounce the immediate prayer to iqamah and order a man to lead the prayer and then flame to burn all those who did not come to prayer, basically, and basically flame their houses and flame them for not attending. So did he actually order that? No. He's just giving us, this is a simile, this is a metaphor, okay? This is not real. But the Prophet ﷺ is basically telling us that this would be, if you think that that is a big deal to flame their houses, which definitely it is, but this hadith is basically telling us, if we could just do that and just let them to come over to the masjid, and even if their houses were burnt down, so that they could understand how important that is, and the only place that would be basically not flamed is the masjid, just to let them realize how important that was, we would have done that. But certainly the Prophet ﷺ would never order such a thing. And never ordered such a thing, but this is like a metaphor, just for us to understand the importance of Salat al-Jama'ah. But certainly this isn't including women. Okay, now the evidence that the scholars that had said that Salat al-Jama'ah is obligatory on men in the masjid, they actually use those evidence, like this ayah that we had just mentioned about Salat al-Khawf in this hadith, and they said, well, if there is a punishment for not doing something, which is as what this hadith is basically saying, that if we were given the permission to burn down and flame their houses, we would have done so, etc. He said, well, that's a form of punishment. But the Prophet ﷺ is indicating, so they're basically taking that inference, indicating that it's basically a sin, and there's something similar to a punishment, that if they would not attend the masjid, that would actually mean that it would be wrong, and therefore it would be haram not to attend the masjid. That's the first opinion. Let's see another evidence that they used. That a man that was blind, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, I don't have somebody to lead me to the masjid. And he asked for a permission to just pray at home. But the Prophet ﷺ had said, sure, you've got the permission to just pray at home since you don't have somebody to lead you. But then when he had left, he called him again. He said, are you capable of hearing the call? He said, yes. He said, then respond to it. Respond to it, meaning come to the masjid, figure out a way how to come to the masjid, even if you are blind. So this is basically, of course, letting us see the importance of Salat al-Jama'ah for men. Let's see Ibn Mas'ud and what he had said. Ibn Mas'ud was basically that Sahabi that the Prophet ﷺ, first of all, when Ibn Mas'ud had met the Prophet ﷺ, Ibn Mas'ud was just a shepherd. Okay, this poor shepherd, he was the skinny, guy, small physique guy, basically taking care of somebody else's sheep and running, the Prophet ﷺ was running away from the people of Quraysh when he meets Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud basically tells the Prophet ﷺ that when the Prophet ﷺ had asked him to drink from any of the milk that he had, and he said, I don't own the sheep, so I cannot give you any of that milk. That's when the Prophet ﷺ wipes over the back for another sheep. But I don't know if a female sheep is called a sheep, but now you know what I'm talking about. Okay, wipes over it and wipes also over, I don't know what the doer is called. It's basically the gland for the sheep. I don't know what it's called, but anyhow, basically wipes over it, and then the Prophet ﷺ says Bismillah, and the whole gland basically fills with milk. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud basically says, well, can you teach me how to do that? And the Prophet ﷺ makes the dua for him that he would become a scholar. And certainly Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was actually one of Kuttab al-Wahi. He was one of the most important Sahaba as well. And he said, quote, وَلَقَدْ رَأَيْتُنَا وَمَا يَتَخَلَّفُ عَنْهَا إِلَّا مُنَافِقٌ مَعْلُومُ النِّفَاقِ وَلَقَدْ كَانَ الرَّجُلُ يؤتى به يهادى بين الرجلين حتى يقام في الصف. He said, the only ones I have seen when no one amongst us stayed away from prayer except a hypocrite whose hypocrisy was well known. And it could happen that a man would walk between two people, basically carrying them and assisting them to line up and stand in the row, even though it was hard for them to basically come to the masjid. But they didn't have crutches, I guess, so they would have someone else to assist that person to come into the masjid. So just see that one. And certainly that's Abdullah ibn Mas'ud basically telling us how the society was living their Islam and how the society was taking Salat al-Jama'ah as their place of community. Go ahead, Layla Ali.
Is there hadith that was it the Prophet or that didn't attend janazas for those munafiq?
Yeah, there is definitely a number of different hadith that the Prophet ﷺ didn't attend Salat al-Janazah on the munafiqeen. Or on a person that didn't pay off their debts. Or it shouldn't be debts, it should be debt. So that one is different. That we're talking about the 5 daily prayers, dear. We're not talking about Salat al-Janazah. Salat al-Janazah is fard kifaya. According to the madhab Hanbali, this is fard ayn. They're talking about the 5 daily prayers.
But were they munafiqs that didn't pray Fajr and Isha, or they're just in their daily life?
In their daily lives.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Of course, I'm going to skip a lot of ahadith. So I'm just going to read some of those ahadith and let you see it. And I don't want to go in all the details. I think because the author is Hanbali madhab, so that's why I guess he was emphasizing the importance of Salat al-Jama'ah in considering it, because they consider it as obligatory. Okay, but for the other madhab, they consider it as a sunnah and not necessarily obligatory. Okay, so I'm gonna skip a lot of these. I'm gonna skip a lot of these and right there go to حكم المتخلف. Let's see. So mention, I guess, according to the madhab Hanbali, if a person does not go for Salat al-Jama'ah, Okay, whether it is due to an illness or probably fear or probably that they didn't necessarily have this habit of leaving Salat al-Jama'ah, the Prophet ﷺ had said, إذا مرض العبد أو سافر كتب له ما كان يعمل صحيحا مقيما. If the person basically has a reason, okay, and they basically had a reason to probably as falling ill or traveling, then they will get the similar reward that he used to get for the good deed that he practiced in residence and also when in good health. So just to keep that one in mind, we talked about this one before. So Salat al-Jama'ah, let's say, the most important thing about Salat al-Jama'ah is really to reveal and reflect a very important ritual in Islam. Let's see, what does the Quran say about Salat al-Masajid? في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه يسبح له فيها بالغدو والأصال. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, رجال لا تلهيهم تجارة ولا بيع عن ذكر الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة يخافون يوما تتقلب فيه القلوب والأبصار. In another ayah, إنما يعمر مساجد الله من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر وأقام الصلاة. Let's look at these two ayat. So in the first ayah, it said in the houses, and by the way, if you were to look at the context of this ayah in Surah An-Nur, it was basically describing, well, the believers, and then it said, في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه. In other words, where would you find these believers? You would find them in the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in those places that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted that his name is basically mentioned, and his and basically the prayer there is happening in the places that is in the masjid, where there would be constant tasbih throughout the night and throughout the day. And the ones to be present there are basically the men that no business, no trade would deter them or pacify them away from the remembrance of Allah Almighty and performing prayer and even doing zakah. What's encouraging them? What's provoking them to get there into the masjid? يَخَافُونَ يَوْمًا تَتَقَلَّبُ فِيهِ الْقُلُوبُ وَالْأَبْصَارُ. They would fear a day when the hearts are basically in fear of what is happening on Judgment Day. That's what's provoking them, and that's what's basically motivating them. Maybe we should use that word instead. What's motivating them to come to the masjid? What's motivating them is basically the fear that they would be afraid of being included in on Judgment Day. Let's see, in another ayah, he said, إِنَّمَا يَعْمُرُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. The ones that would attend and fill the masajid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are really the ones that would believe in Allah and Judgment Day. And they would be performing prayer. Let's see. What about a person that lives right next to the masjid? The Prophet ﷺ had said, why did he say ruya? Okay. So, I'm just wondering why he said ruya. It just came to my mind right now. I didn't actually review the authenticity of this hadith because he's saying ruya. Why is he saying ruya? Let me, inshallah, later on actually research why he said the ruya, because ruya is giving me an indication that this is not an authentic hadith. But from what I had known is that it's an authentic hadith, but maybe it needs further scrutiny and further study. Okay, let's say he said, لا صلاة لجار المسجد إلا في المسجد. A person that lives right next to the masjid, okay, they cannot pray but in the masjid. No obligatory prayer of the one who is a neighbor of a masjid except in the masjid. They should not perform their prayer but in the masjid if they're living next to the masjid. There's actually a lot of benefit in being around and next to the masjid. Number one is that your children would basically connect with the masjid like it's their own home. They would relate to the masjid, and that's one thing I liked about Palestine especially. I know the same goes in Egypt. I know Somalia, all Muslim countries, because safety is not the same as you would find in the West, but it's very safe in Muslim countries. The children would roam around in the neighborhoods basically safely and freely without being afraid that they might get kidnapped or anything like that, because it would be completely safe. And they would go to the masajid, etc. It would be completely safe. But unfortunately, in places like the Western countries, it wouldn't be safe to basically do that. I know in Chicago, though, in Chicago, I was in Harlem, and what is that, Bridgeview neighborhood, and I was so impressed by it was in Chicago, in Bridgeview, in Illinois. In Bridgeview, you had all these neighborhoods that were surrounded by the masajid, and you can even hear the adhan out in the parking lot, and even the nearby homes, they would hear the adhan out in public. And I know in Minneapolis, I didn't hear it, but I was told that in Minneapolis that they were given the permission to do certain adhan for certain salawat to basically be on loudspeakers. I didn't hear it, even though I was in Minneapolis many times. I didn't really hear it, so I don't know why, but maybe it was, it wasn't too loud, but it was to a certain amount of loudness. I don't know, volume, maybe it was a certain amount. I know I went to Detroit as well, many neighborhoods. It was the whole neighborhood being Muslim. I didn't see the kids playing outside like you would see in Muslim countries, but definitely Detroit and Dearborn. I love those areas, at least in the Muslim neighborhoods. It was really astonishing. The food was great. All right. But unfortunately, definitely, I didn't really see, maybe that's changing, but I did really see a lot of cultural influence that was at the expense of Muslim presence and Muslim activism. So that was really a concern, but maybe it's changing. So let's hope that it would be changing, but definitely culture was probably being stronger than religion in Dearborn and Detroit. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I sensed. But yeah. Okay, let's continue right there. In Muslim countries, the same thing. You would always see culture basically having a huge influence right there. But it's important to have the children basically play outside, have those experiences, basically, I would say hands-on experiences, unity within the society, etc., and actually create that community. Okay, let's see. Ibn al-Qayyim, we talked about Ibn al-Qayyim before. He said he was originally from Nablus and then later on basically moved to Syria. He said, quote, من تأمل السنة حق التأمل تبين له أن فعلها في المساجد فرض على الأعيان إلا لعارض يجوز معه ترك الجماعة. What did he say? So Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, whoever looks deeply, I would say whoever scrutinizes, then looks deeply into the Sunnah, he will realize that performing prayer in the mosque is an obligation on every individual, except for an excuse permitting him to leave the congregational prayer. In other words, abandoning the prayer in the mosque with no excuse is similar to the act of abandoning congregational prayer with no excuse. All hadiths and traditions agree unanimously on this principle. Note, Ibn al-Qayyim is Hanbali madhab. Okay, that's why he said that. Okay, he's Hanbali madhab. So just wanted to note that one. Okay, I'm just going to skip a lot of this, okay, because it's involving Salat al-Jama'ah that, I guess he's really supporting that opinion, and he's really, I guess, strong and making that emphasis that it's obligatory, and unfortunately he didn't say that it was differences of opinion, so that's kind of ironic, but I would actually say that because the debate is actually strong. But let's go past that one. And as women, let's talk about at least what relates to us, which is here it said, and it's permissible for women to attend the masjid, basically with the permission from their husbands. Permission from their husbands. Hold on, we're gonna see that some scholars view. Hold on, I'm trying to find that area that's talking about women just to see what he had said. So, okay, how am I going to find it is the question. Okay, I'm trying to find it, but I can't find it. Oh dear, I really passed it. I'm trying to find it. Sorry, ladies. I know it was somewhere around here. Hold on, let's see. As for women, there we go. He said it is viewed permissible for them to attend the congregation in a mosque after taking the permission from their husbands. Okay. And I'm going to read what he says in English, okay? This is to be done on certain conditions, namely, women must not be perfumed, nor should they be nor should they show their adornment, and they should perform prayer with a complete cover. Is that what the guy says in Arabic? He said, يسن لهن أن يصلين okay, where did it? Okay, مع التستر التام والابتعاد عن مخالطة الرجال. That's what he's saying. Okay, they should not mingle with men. They must perform prayer while standing behind the rows of men. This permissibility comes from the fact that women used to attend the congregation in the lifetime. So up until here, all scholars agreed on this. No differences of opinions. That it's permissible for women to attend a congregation after taking the permission from their husband, agreed upon between scholars. Well, wait a minute. What if he doesn't allow her to get out? He's basically saying that he's a very jealous man, doesn't want his wife to go out. He'll be held accountable for that. He'll be held accountable for, I guess, exaggerating his jealousy. All right. But generally speaking, it is recommended that women would go, especially during nighttime. Okay, especially during nighttime, and that men should not abuse their authority over women. But there are different circumstances that he might say, well, when you would attend the masjid, the kids are still too young, it's not right, etc. He can actually do that. So in other words, we're speaking about just like there's an authority outside, there's also an authority inside of the home. So definitely take your husband's permission. And if he basically is authoritative in that order and not necessarily giving you the space to attend the masjid, maybe remind him how the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned, do not prevent and forbid the female servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from attending the masajid. And that is the Prophet ﷺ basically telling the men to not abuse their power and to allow the women to attend the masajid. And the conditions basically, number one, to basically remember that they shouldn't be coming in with their, I guess, their different types of cosmetics, whether we're speaking about makeup or whether we're speaking about perfume or whether we're speaking about just trying to show off their beautiful clothes or whatever, that when you go into the masjid, please respect the masjid and that it's a place of dhikr and not a place of show off. And it's definitely not a ballroom for, for somehow coming in to, I guess, reveal your beauty and all of that. So just come into the masjid and in respect that this is a place of dhikr, a place of reminder. All right. And one thing I would also like to say, just a side note, especially in places like the US, Canada, US, the different places, I know, I used to do matchmaking. I know you're like, okay, you're jumping into matchmaking. What? The masjid is supposed to be a place of matchmaking. I will say that attending the masajid creates a unity, creates a family, and part of that is basically to help people know one another. And certainly, when you know other people, it basically creates an opportunity for your future as well, even for matchmaking as well. So I know you're supposed to have the intention to go to the masjid, for the intention of prayer, etc. But I would like to add, especially during the times that we're living in, where people are not meeting, getting, I guess, this type of social interaction with one another, and that becomes really rare. And many times women, they're basically attending all those different spaces, whether at work or whether it's in shopping centers, etc. So the masajid is one of those areas that we should definitely encourage women to attend, because that's going to help reducing the fitna. That's going to be helping in reducing the fitna that women are facing, and therefore they would see a Muslim community that also recognizes their presence. And what I mean by recognizes their presence, recognizes their presence, meaning recognizing their needs, maybe in halaqas and learning Islam, recognizing their needs, probably also that they are present, they also have a, let's call it a social duty upon the ummah. So instead of those guys basically saying, well, we don't see the Muslim women. I'm not saying ladies go over there to basically present your beauty and present yourself. Absolutely not. That's not what you should be doing at the masjid. Okay. But by you being present within the Muslim community, which really marks the masjid, that's what will also let others know of your presence, and therefore it will be increasing the chances of you finding, let's say, and other people knowing about you, to basically bring in, let's say, a candidate to help you find that Muslim bond. So I would say the masjid is more than a bond for a spiritual bond. I would say the masajid are a social bond as well. I would say the masajid are a bond that we always need to consider as our home. It's our home, especially the ones living in the West. The ones that are isolated from the masjid, they'll end up not having a Muslim social bond, not having a spiritual social bond, and they'll be an easy target for a lot of fitna. So that's what I would like to point out right here. So this is extremely important to keep in mind. I know some people would like to comment on this one, so go ahead, comment. I would love to hear it. I know some people are going to not like what I'm saying, and those that are living in the West will fully understand what I'm talking about. But like I said, on a condition that they're keeping those conditions of how to come into the masjid and how to respect the masjid and what it contains in the regulation. Basically, the regulations for the masjid, they're supposed to be taken seriously. So, but I wanted to say that the masajid are not only spiritual enhancers, but they're also social enhancers. The masajid are a unity. The masajid are a bond with the rest of the ummah. So if you have something to say, I'd love to hear it. I don't mind somebody, putting it in the comment below, or, in the chat or whatever it is. Tell me what you think. That's okay. I'll be very open to people disagreeing with me and all of that, but I really think this is extremely important, especially as a Muslim that lived in the West. I fully understand the hardship, the fitna that women go through, especially women. The guys, it's a lot easier. For the guys, it's a lot easier because he can get married to a non-Muslim, basically a Christian, a Jew, they can get married to that. And later on, we had many cases where they even converted to Islam and they don't have a problem. But for the Muslim women, they could only find a Muslim man. And if they are separated from this society, then they're going to find themselves really facing the fitna of not even having someone recognize their existence, recognize their presence. That's a big fitna for the women. I can see it, somebody's writing in the chat, so I'm just gonna, like the MSA found their spouse. Right, I mean, the MSA, it's, well, I mean, you've got, yeah, definitely, I mean, you know, I mean, the online apps, all of those, definitely, they're good, but I would really recommend the Masajid over those online apps, because at the end, you know, you're within your neighborhood. I would say when it's the masjid, you are within your neighborhood. You don't necessarily have to probably relocate and, you know, lose your job or probably be away from your family, etc. You're within your location. You're within your area that is considered as your neighborhood. Okay. So it makes it a lot easier to, one, search that person's background, makes it a lot easier for you to not feel that you're giving up so much to relocate and adjust, because that's a big deal for many. So if you attend your local masjid, like I said, you're creating a social bond. Creating a social bond is extremely important. And certainly ladies, especially the older ladies, please get to know the younger girls, because you pretty much act as that middle person between the men that have probably, I would say the I guess the ability, maybe that space to talk to you, to relate to the older women, and then the older women, and by the older women, I mean, you know, possibly 60 and up or 50 and up, you know, they would be this middle person in between, you know, a 20-year-old man or, you know, 20 something plus year old man, or probably within that age group. You know, they can't go, of course, in the women's area, but they can probably have their mother. But if their mother is not there, they can probably talk to an older woman and say, hey, auntie, you know, I'm looking to get married. Can you find me one of those sisters that would be a good match for me? So she would basically be kind of like the mother of everyone, kind of like everybody's mother, and be this middle person between the women. And basically, she would also be the mother, like to those women that don't have their mothers around them, probably give them like a genuine advice, give them that wisdom, share that moment to help them relate to knowing how to connect with the rest of the Muslim community. So there's a responsibility on the older women that don't necessarily have the same type of fitna as the younger women. And, you know, the older women should also be in those positions to create this bond and be available. Probably the ones that are doing the matchmaking in the masjid. This is extremely important. The women that are doing the matchmaking in the masjid, basically the older women, they're basically acting as the middle person between the younger guys and also the women on the other side of the masjid. And certainly this is extremely important. Every masjid should have matchmaking, a matchmaking, I guess, uh, like department, because this is a fitna. This is a big fitna. And if we don't actually have that as part of the masjid, then we are creating more and more fitan out there. So creating those bonds is extremely important. Having a matchmaking department within your masjid is a must, is definitely a must. And there has to be certain individuals. Let's say Sister X or Sister Y is actually known to be the person that, one, knows how to preserve people's confidentiality. That's really important, and people's information. Number two is an outgoing person, a very social person, a very extroverted person who just knows how to deal with people. Number three is an older person. And number four, why not even pay her for that job? Because it's going to be time consuming, and that way it could be a part-time job, and she could basically be the person, just like you would pay a person that's cleaning, doing the cleaning job, pay your matchmakers. pay your matchmakers, because that's going to help them basically getting encouraged to helping you do the job that you're not capable of doing. And it takes a lot of time. Okay, let's continue right there. I know we were talking about salah and then we went into matchmaking. Okay, I don't do matchmaking anymore because I'm away from, relating to people. So please don't contact me for matchmaking anymore. Sorry, I'm not available anymore because I basically am living away from people. Okay, let's see. In the masajid, what's the importance about a masjid? فيه رجال يحبون أن يتطهروا والله يحب المطهرين. In a masjid, you will find the men that would love to seek purification, and the Lord Almighty loves al-mutahhirin. So, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves al-mutahhirin, then we should love al-mutahhirin. So, who's al-mutahhirin again? Those are the people that perform purification. Well, are we talking about like wudu, or what are we talking about? We're talking about inner purification, spiritual purification, and we're also talking about external purification, which is wudu and considering basically tahara. So we're talking about both types of tahara. Tahara internally and tahara externally. Okay, let's see. What about different things? Can you encourage me to go to masjid? It's a little distant from me. So the Prophet ﷺ said, أعظم الناس أجرا في الصلاة أبعدهم فأبعدهم ممشى. The Prophet ﷺ said the ones that basically get the highest reward are the ones that are most distant from the masjid. Okay, the ones that are farthest to the masjid would basically get the highest reward. That's basically what it means. And the Prophet ﷺ, let's say, the mosques are only to be maintained by those who believe in Allah. Okay, well, that one is this ayah. No, that's not this ayah. Which way is it? That's not that ayah. Because, yeah, I don't know which one. Okay, here we go. Okay, let's see. So, should we actually pray? Okay, here we go. This is the ayah. This is the hadith. Within it are men who purify themselves. This one. This ayah is this ayah. And this ayah is this ayah. إِنَّمَا يَعْمُرُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. Okay? This ayah is this ayah. Okay? I'm trying to help those that don't read Arabic basically find the equivalent, the equivalent ayat and quotes in English to make it easy for them. Okay, أعظم الناس أجرا, the people who get the most reward, basically this hadith is this hadith right there, are the ones that are farthest to the masjid. The prayer performed in congregation, let's say this is the hadith, صلاة الجميع تزيد على صلاته في بيته وصلاته في سوقه 25 درجة. The prayer performed in congregation is 25 times more superior to the prayer offered alone in one's house or in a business center. For if the one of you performs ablution, does not do it perfectly, and then and does it perfectly, does not do it. Oh man. And does it perfectly, and then proceeds to the masjid with the sole intention of performing prayer, then for each step he takes towards the masjid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lifts up degree and rewards and crosses out basically a sin until he enters the mosque or the masjid. Okay, and this is, I'm just going to go over this one because it's, we need to I don't know why he actually wanted to really emphasize, I guess, the importance of Salat al-Jama'ah in the masjid. So I think he included all the different hadith that relate to it. Okay, let's see some of the different rulings about Salat al-Jama'ah. Oh, whoa, it's 11:34 already. Okay. Should we continue this? Hold on, let's see how many pages. Oh yeah, we should continue. We just have a page and a half left. Not too bad. Okay, some of Salat al-Jama'ah. If the Salat al-Jama'ah basically happens, and certainly there's the adhan, and in that situation, you would not be permitted to pray any voluntary prayer except Salat al-Jama'ah. So not even Tahiyyat al-Masjid, not even Tahiyyat al-Masjid. What's the evidence? The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا أُقِيمَتِ الصَّلَاةِ فَلَا صَلَاةَ إِلَّا الْمَكْتُوبَةِ. If the congregation were, in other words, no man should, no, not this one. if the congregation basically happens, then in that situation, if the congregation is already established, then you should only pray the obligatory prayer that basically is performed. Okay, so what does he say here? No man should lead another in prayer. Why is he skipping? He didn't translate this hadith, did he not? Hold on. Okay, here it is. No obligatory prayer. No. I think he forgot to translate this one. No. Wait, I'm on the wrong page. Here we go. No prayer is to be performed, but which had begun. Okay, now we're on the right page. So this is basically this one. Okay. And therefore, فلا صلاة إلا التي أقيمت. Then the only prayer that you would be praying is basically the one that the congregation already started in. And of course, what is the reason behind that? Imam al-Nawawi, where's it Imam al-Nawawi from? Basically from Syria, everybody. And he said, and the wisdom behind that is also so that the person would only be busy with the obligatory prayer, and therefore, if they wanted to complete anything else, basically after it, that they could do that. Let's see. He said, the reason behind is to let the Muslim be devoted to the obligatory prayer from its beginning. That is to start it immediately after the Imam. Moreover, to observe the perfection of the obligatory prayer is worthier than getting busy with a voluntary prayer. Another reason is that the Prophet ﷺ forbade disagreeing with Imams. Furthermore, the stated virtue of the opening takbir, which is takbirat al-ihram, is not to be gained except when said immediately after the Imam. Okay, so that's basically. So what about أقيمت الصلاة وهو في صلاة النافلة? What about if they were praying Tahiyat al-Masjid, and then, I mean, they didn't expect that. It was supposed to be at, I don't know, 7:15 Salat al-Maghrib, but then I guess the Imam got confused, and the Adhan was at 7 p.m. The Iqama was expected to be done at 7:15. So I thought I had enough time to basically pray Tahiyat al-Masjid. I came at 7:05. I prayed Tahiyat al-Masjid. And while I was praying Tahiyat al-Masjid, this random Imam, I guess or maybe wasn't random, he basically started the Iqama for Salat al-Maghrib earlier than the expected time. So what should I do then? I already started my Tahiyat al-Masjid, and right now they're already praying. Here we are, they're already starting to pray Salat al-Maghrib. What am I going to do? So in that situation, you want to not scurry per se, but you would want to basically make that voluntary prayer basically fast in a way where you're doing your ruku', you're doing your sujood, you're reading your Fatiha, don't read any other surahs, but you're basically making it fast but complete, okay? Fast but complete in order to make it for Salat al-Jama'ah. So don't stop your Salah in the middle, but basically continue it, and أتمها خفيفة. So this is it, everybody. You had really been patient. Next week, inshallah, we'll be talking about al-masbuq, the latecomer to congregational prayer. What should they do? And we'll also hopefully talk about, so we're talking about the latecomer, and then we're talking about women's coming into the masjid. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Not too much because we talked about that too many times. So, but anyhow, and we'll also talk about al-imama. What about the person that's leading the prayer? Do they have like a special reward, or What do they get in? And what about the imam? Like, does there have to be a specific imam? Can the imam get paid for being imam? And how do we relate to that? And what are the conditions for a person to be an imam? Okay, so we'll talk about that, and inshallah next week. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. No questions asked? Everybody just wants to go to sleep. That's all right. So inshallah, we'll stop right here, the recording.